Hello, and welcome to episode 67 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. This is Jon Denning in Los Angeles.
And this is Dave Killorn in Napa Valley.
Yes, it is. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Another weekend recording, which I really like.
Yeah, me too. Not that we ever have any, drink guilt, but if we did, there's none on a Sunday.
Sunday night before a nice Monday work day.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
It's a good time to relax. No day drinking, though.
No. This is some late afternoon drinking, which is my second kind of favorite, I think.
Second kind of favorite.
Breakfast
First is
drinking.
Early morning.
Breakfast drinking is my favorite.
I knew what you were thinking before you said it.
Right.
We've got some good drink choices today, too, as well.
Tell us where they're courtesy of.
Yeah, I've got a friend on Twitter that's one of our students that I talk to every once in a while. And he was up on vacation in Durango, Colorado, and sent me some screenshots of pictures. And I was like, I'm totally using those. And so I don't know the name of the bar in Durango, and I've never been to Durango, although I always like the name. But there are two drinks here. One I'm having, which is called I'm Your Huckleberry, which is clearly a reference to the old Tombstone movie and Val Kilmer's, famous line that I'm your Huckleberry.
I'm your Huckleberry.
Except the problem here is the drink calls for Huckleberry 44 North vodka, which I never heard of, but it's a distillery up in Idaho, and I checked out their page. I actually really liked it quite a bit, so I think I'm going to have to try to order some. But I didn't have that, so I'm using Sky Blueberry vodka.
There you go.
So in this case, John, I think I'm your blueberry.
I'm your blueberry.
And what are you drinking?
It's a great movie, by the way. I can't recommend it enough. If you've never seen Tombstone, it's in my probably top 3 favorite movies of all time. I love it.
It's excellent.
By vicarious request, I am drinking, in a way, a reference to another one of my favorite movies, which I don't know if this is meant to be, but a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas quote. I'm drinking a drink called As Your Attorney, which, of course, a great movie, a great book, Hunter S. Thompson. Benicio del Toro plays the attorney in that movie and says a lot of things prefaced with that quote. As your attorney, I advise you to start drinking heavily. As your attorney, I recommend a fast car with no top. These kinds of things. Unfortunately, kind of like you, I had to modify this a bit. It requires bourbon, which I had, but apricot liqueur, which, no surprise, I did not have.
Few people have that. I don't even have it.
I wouldn't even know where to begin to track that down. Probably a liquor store, but I didn't bother. Anyway, that and some simple syrup, some lemon juice. I had most of that. So what I've done instead is I've modified a hot toddy to approximate this. If you don't know what a hot toddy is, and if you're under 60, you probably don't.
Under 100.
I drink it and play bingo. It's bourbon, tea, honey, typically, and lemon. This is what I was drinking Friday night, believe it or not, when the earthquake knocked it off my kitchen table.
I'm glad you survived that.
Well, everything survived but my cocktail, so I suppose it could have been worse. But
definitely could have been.
Yeah.
Although I must say that a hot toddy variant is basically in complete opposition to Fear and Loathing. Which, by the way, if you've never read the book, read it. It is my number 1 favorite all-time book.
Is that right?
Yes, definitely.
Fantastic.
Love that book.
Yeah, it's endlessly quotable.
It basically makes me laugh throughout the entire book. It's just ridiculously hilarious. Hunter S. Thompson, a genius and also a crazy man.
Yeah, gonzo defined. As it were.
But we're going to post the recipes for these drinks online. We were asked to do that. And a hat tip to M134 Hero on Twitter for shooting us the screenshots. If there's one thing I really like to receive, it's pictures of drinks and drink recipes. So feel free to fire away out there.
There you go. So, Dave, thanks for passing that recommendation on. We've also got an interesting song. I suppose I could take credit for this, although in a way it was more of a throw-off, and then we realized both of us how appropriate it actually was. We were talking a little bit about the score release over the last week, and I was asking you what you thought LSAC was going to do. I said, are they going to change policy or just ride the storm out Speedwagon style? And of course you agreed they were going to ride out the storm. And that inspired today's song.
Yeah, so that is REO Speedwagon's Ridin The Storm Out. It's the live version off their greatest hits album. And I couldn't, honestly, I'll admit this. I was in complete shock when I realized you'd made a Speedwagon reference. I was like, wow, that's really digging deep.
Thank you.
I didn't know you knew that catalog. And I'm not a big Speedwagon fan, but in the process of choosing this song, I went back and I listened to some of their stuff and I was like, man, they were at times better than I remembered. Like the guitar playing was great. It's still a little whiny. Kevin Cronin was never like my favorite singer. And so he sometimes sounds like he's very weak. So not my favorite, but this is a great song, and it's perfect for what we're talking about, not just with the score release and all the LSAT writing problems, but even what I would say is the coming judicial storm now that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has regrettably passed.
Yeah. The earthquake poured one out for, I'm afraid. Understandably.
Only you can make that connection.
Thank you.
But I applaud you for it.
Thank you. So, rest in power, Ruth. We miss you.
On that somber note, let's move to the LSAT world.
Yeah.
So it's been a busy week.
It has. We've referenced this a little bit already, but obviously one of the peaks of interest over the past week is the August score release that started on the 18th.
For some.
Well, that's why I say started on the 18th, as opposed to was on the 18th.
For many, it began on the 18th, but not for everybody.
It is an ongoing score release, unfortunately.
There was a lot of consternation and apprehension ahead of this release because of the problems in getting LSAT writing results back, which we will talk about in a little bit more detail. But it meant that in the days prior to the 18th, tons of people just had no idea whether or not their scores would be appearing. And that adds a layer of extra stress to what is already a stressful process. So that I thought was really regrettable. And then as it started at 9 a.m. Eastern, or a little bit before, actually, a lot of people were able to get in. So many people showed up presumptively that it crashed their site. And they did something that you really rarely see. They tweeted about it. They're like, site's crashing. And they'd sent me a message. They're like, if people could just wait 5 minutes. And I was like, yes, that would be great if they would. However, human nature does not suggest that they actually will. Yeah. Not when the F5 key is so easy to hit.
While we're suggesting ifs, if your site just worked, how about that?
You won't go right for the jugular right there.
It's going to be one of those days.
I think the comment that I had made to them was, well, yeah, when you go from 0 to 20,000 users, there's going to probably be some degree of problem. And I think they're aware of that fact being an issue. So I wonder if next time we'll see it be a lot better, because the response that I got in talking to them about it was they weren't too happy about it. Yet it happens every time to some greater or lesser extent. This seemed a lot worse, though. I had people an hour later who were like, I still can't get in.
Me too.
So what was the results, the reaction to that test when people did get their scores, in your opinion?
To me, this was a bit more of a mixed bag, perhaps. I saw a lot of positive student comments, as you do, a lot of engagement and enthusiasm. There were some people that were clearly disappointed as well. It could have just been, and I have to temper myself in terms of this, because remember, this was a test that was about twice as large as any other flex that we've seen so far.
Yeah.
So hearing the volume of student comments is really just proportional to the volume of people.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that it was an interesting set of results. The really large number of messages that I've received on prior flex tests with people who had scores that exceeded any prior score, it wasn't as large this time.
Yeah, I felt that too.
And so I feel like this was, it didn't produce that high level of variance on the positive side that some of the previous ones did. So we had a lot of positive responses and feedback, and I'll, of course, always appreciate hearing that. It's one of my favorite things about talking to students is that somebody comes in and they're like, I didn't think I could do it, but I did it. And I got a lot of messages like that. And it seemed like our scale predictions were pretty accurate, too.
Yeah, I did hear that consistently. The reactions themselves might not have been quite as consistent as they had been, but I think we nailed it in terms of what we expected the difficulty sort of ranking or curve to be.
Yeah, we knew the majority of these tests were on the harder side, just from the numbers of the combinations, and I think that actually played out. This wasn't the easiest set of administrations for students to go through. So if you came through it and you've gotten the score that you wanted, congratulations.
Yeah, for sure.
Hopefully you're done with this test. You can still listen to us, though.
Yeah, by all means, stick around. We'll still be here. I promise you that.
We'll still be drinking.
Yeah, barring fires and earthquakes and whatever else. Cirrhosis.
Let's hope not anytime soon. So let's get to the big drama of everything that happened here, and that would be the LSAT writing holds that we ran into. So what's the basic rule, John, in terms of like whether or not you're going to get your score? What controls that?
Right. So in August, the school release was predicated, for the first time ever, released to students was predicated on them having a finalized and approved writing sample in LSAC system in their account. Previously, they would hold it for schools, but at least give students the score. August test required that you actually have the writing for yourself. And that was the mess of it all for a number of reasons. A lot of people didn't know this policy change, obviously, and some other things that we will certainly talk about.
Yeah, I think the night before, they told me that they had something like 5,500 people who still hadn't taken it.
Yeah.
And so if you're one of those people and you've now realized, oh, I've got to go not just take this. It's not about taking it. It's about having it later approved. At this point, you need to do that in order to get your results because they're just going to hold it until they get that. And they, as we'll mention in a few minutes, they've decided not to decouple those ideas there.
Yeah, let me interject a quick suspicion on that. I don't think any of those 5,500 people listen to us. Because if they listen to us, they would not be among those 5,500. We have said for over a month in every episode, go do the essay. So either this is your first episode ever and welcome, go do the essay, or we're talking to people who knew better.
I have a feeling a lot of people knew better. Although I did talk to a lot of students who just took it that week and who were really hoping for fast turnaround.
And that was the bigger issue to me, was the delays.
Yeah. So it was quite a mess, as you've noted a couple of times. How does it work? I want to kind of walk through this process just a little bit and try to give some information that will provide perspective on what you're seeing, especially if you're out there and you see people talking about it and they're like, data point. I took the test this date. I got approved on this date.
Yeah, and certainly people who maybe are first-timers in October and November who are going to face this same policy. They're going to have to do an essay for the first time for themselves to get those scores. So they'll want to know this as well.
That's exactly right. So when you go take your LSAT writing, assuming that everything goes reasonably well and it completes, what happens at that point is it actually goes to a vendor. PSI, I believe,
I think that's right.
is their name. And this is not like some kind of special privileged information. Their phone representatives were telling people this. So it goes to a vendor, and what the vendor does is they check it for violations. So it's a basic process where you're really going to come out into one of two groups. One of the groups is there's a problem. All right, so we'll talk about them in just a second. The other group is everything looks good. So if you're in the everything looks good group, your time of response and completion will be much faster because they didn't see a problem. So then they send that file to LSAC. And what happens at that point is that they say, oh, these are all clear, and they start the process of confirming them, which doesn't take all that long.
It does take 1 to 3 days even for initially approved essays to just get sent over to LSAC at times, though, right?
They have longer than that, apparently, by agreement, but they tend to move more quickly, I think, especially when, they saw all the pressure.
Flagged,
Yeah, when the numbers started to rise, I think they said, all right, we've got to move a little bit faster. But overall, what that means is if you are in the clear group, you're not flagged, you're going to get your response faster in every single instance than anybody who went into the group that had problems. It's because there's really, it's a touch-free kind of process. Oh, the vendor said it was good. All right, go ahead and process those. What happens on the other side, though? And this is really interesting. You think about all the people who took the LSAT writing in recent days. Over 50% of the sessions were flagged as having issues. So, there's different ways to view this. Like, boy, I wish the rules weren't quite so strict. I wish it was clearer at the beginning. For example, one of the things that I'm certainly going to ask them to add is directions on showing your scratch paper at the beginning and the end, if that's what's needed, whatever allows the process to go more smoothly. Or maybe you could say that, hey, people didn't follow the rules or they weren't aware of the rules, and so they didn't realize that there was going to be an issue. But over 50% of all the essays were flagged. So PSI separates those out into a different file. And then that file is sent over to LSAC. And then they have the, misfortune, the unhappy task of having to look at each session to see exactly what the nature of the violation was as to whether or not it is serious. And as we've said before, some of them are really serious. Wearing a smartwatch, having a phone right there. These are the kinds of things where they're like, sorry, your response is canceled.
Yeah, not showing your ID.
Yeah. I would love to see that change because I don't think there's too many people trying to cheat on a 35-minute essay.
With their
And
Apple
I think
Watch.
they could relax.
Right.
Yeah. I think they could relax the requirements here. But at that point, what's occurring is you're now at the end of a long group of people being hand reviewed. And they don't have to watch all 35 minutes of it. They can fast forward and so forth. But that's going to take a lot longer. And that's where we started to see the delays as people began just taking the LSAT writing. So some people were like, oh, I took it recently and I got my results in completed status. And other people were like, I took it 10 days earlier and I'm not completed. That's completely normal. That means that you were flagged and the other person wasn't. And so as people were asking me questions on Twitter and Reddit and what have you, I could tell immediately if they were flagged or not. And of course, if you tell somebody you've been flagged, they freak out because they're like, oh no, I don't want to have it canceled. I'm like, look, most of the time it's not going to be an issue at all, but sometimes it will be. So we're just going to have to wait and see. And that's where you sit there with results pending, and then eventually it goes to completion. But the key thing is to not create a violation. That's what allows your essay to be processed as quickly as possible. So show the ID. Don't wear a smartwatch. Keep your phone out of there. No backpacks. All the things that we've been really talking about for a couple weeks at this point.
Yeah, I saw pictures of people posting pictures up of the rooms they had basically built to take the essay in, pillow fort style rooms, where it was just a white sheet, like a teepee, wrapped around everything, and it was them and their laptop, and that was all you could see is just this background of white, completely sterilized. They were like, I will not get flagged. And sadly, it may require that degree of like preventative care.
It's frustrating.
It's very frustrating. And the fact that you still don't know if you've been flagged for several days, maybe a week, equally frustrating.
So what's your grade for how it all went down?
Well, given the delays, given the lack of communication, given the fact that I was kind of desperately hoping they were going to change this policy even up to the 11th hour Thursday night, and they never did, I'm afraid this is going to be one of the worst grades I've given them about things. A C minus if I'm inflating, but a D plus probably if I'm honest. It's not pretty here from my perspective.
It's funny because sometimes I think if I had no idea the amount of work that they went through, I would probably be sitting in the exact same spot. And you kind of know the situation. I think you're looking at it from the external side of things.
That's what got the plus on the D, is I know how much work they put in.
I'm sure everybody in Newtown, Pennsylvania is so thrilled with your plus.
Sorry. Yeah, you're welcome.
This is, again, there's this kind of like bifurcation in the group of people where it's like if it went smoothly and you got your results relatively quickly, you're like, it was no problem.
Right.
If you didn't and you had a problem, it's almost an immediate F. And so it's really to be very dependent upon the issues that you had. I know for a fact that they pulled in people from all over the organization to go through as many essays as possible. And I also know that a lot of people left it really late and didn't make it easy. I know that on Thursday night, there were people in their offices or at least working all the way through to go through this. And so I have to at least acknowledge the fact that they recognized there was a problem. They saw the rising tide of issues, and then they said, all right, let's turn on the juice. So I really appreciate that. And it made it so that people kept getting their scores all the way through the weekend here, which tells me they didn't stop.
Yeah.
So I have to at least say there's a hat tip there to the recognition that there were serious issues and it was going to require extra hours, and that actually happened. I do have my complaints. It's tough to communicate to everybody. So what we ended up with was people making phone calls on Friday trying to get through to LSAC and having a lot of trouble. I don't know if they had a phone issue or whatever occurred, but there were some hold times on Friday that were extremely long. And then secondarily, I've harped on this many times before, the phone staff doesn't seem to have consistent answers. And that is a huge problem to me. I talked to students who were told certain things that I knew to be false. And I don't think it was intentional. They weren't trying to be told something. They were just saying stuff that was kind of like 2 years out of date in terms of this. And so a lot of people were told, oh, you took it on September 1st and here it's the 18th. You don't have your results yet. Just wait. No. At that point, it's been 17 days. There was a problem somewhere. And in some cases, the video hadn't been passed along. Some people fall through the cracks in something like this. It's completely understandable. But hey, you have someone on the phone. If me, a guy who doesn't work there, can understand this, you, a person on the phones at LSAC, you can understand it. And so that's what I'd really like to see, is that effort to communicate what's happening and the clarity with that. I love the fact that they do so much more than they ever did previously. We're at least able to help students at a lot more efficient rate because of all the information that we have about what's happening. But that needs to be communicated in a broader sense as well.
Yeah, I completely agree on both those points. I know they put in a lot of effort last minute, but I also know that the communication was not good all week, really, and certainly on the final 2 days.
Yeah.
And that, again, I stand by my grade.
You know, I'd prefer to grade this like an NFL lineman. Like, okay, strength is this, speed is that. Like, there's different grades to different facets to what happened.
I
To
see.
me, it's really hard to make a single overall grade on this because I saw things that were really, really quite well done. And then I saw things where I was like, it would be really nice if this was clearer.
Yeah, to me, they were cut at the combine. That's how I feel about it.
And the
Sports
NFL
jokes.
is back. I love it. Well, actually, I don't love it because the Vikings got crushed today,
Yeah.
but we're not going to talk about that.
Sorry to
It's
salt that
depressing.
wound. Have a drink.
Mhm. Don't mind if I do.
All right. So let me then introduce maybe the final point on the writing sample, because there's only so much we can do to belabor this. But why is it then that LSAC seems so insistent on continuing to require this at all, much less for score release to schools, and now most onerously for score release to anyone and everyone? Why is it that they care so much or seem to be just so damn determined to keep this thing around?
Well, I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about this previously, and the repeated feedback I get is that the schools want it.
Right.
And schools have said, no, we'd prefer to have something like this, that it provides an independent confirmation of writing ability that you can't get with a personal statement, which is obviously something that people have a long time to massage. And so it provides kind of a raw look at how people are performing.
And that's
And the
fair.
schools
but-
appreciate that, or at least desire it to the extent that they don't want it to go away. And why do they tie it to the score release? Because they want to force you to do it.
Yes, that. True or false that we've heard that schools are actually a little bit disgruntled at times with the old policy that people would get their score before their applications were technically complete. They were still lacking an essay, and they'd start to contact the schools. Be like, hey, I got a 167, and the school's like, yeah, but we can't see everything yet. We don't know that because you haven't done the essay. You know that, but we don't. And it was creating this like disconnect or this confusion. Perhaps even like misconnections of things.
I can say that I believe it's true that the schools are worried about that scenario.
Right.
Where someone would get their score, yet it wouldn't have been sent over from the official agency, in this case, LSAC. And then the person will call and be like, I got this. And then somebody's making a faulty decision if it turned out that the person lied or is scheming or what have you.
Gives them false
I know
hope
that
or
there's-
false pessimism.
Yeah, you may notice something whenever we're talking about this, especially with the way policies are set up. A lot of the policies around the LSAT writing, what have you, are built to stop cheating and trying to kind of like game the system. And, we've talked about this a lot, and I feel like this test format is particularly not prone to being gamed in that fashion. But it's a holdover. It's an attitude that has been there for years and years, and there are legitimate reasons why. We know that people continue to try to cheat on the LSAT, and they always probably will because people are people. But again, you're looking at a very, very small percentage of individuals that are affecting everybody else. Yeah, if somebody called up, the University of Florida and said, I got a 165, let me in. If I'm Florida, I'm sitting there saying to myself, no, I'll be waiting for the score report to come in from LSAC, and then we'll make our decision, friend.
Believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I just see it's just a way to ward off some extra calls that would be out there. And to me, I don't see the reason for it. I think they could decouple these things and not have an issue.
Yeah, you mentioned this to me as this was all kind of beginning to unfold. And my first comment about it was, well, I guess that completely craters the idea that they'd ever begin to release unofficial immediate raw scores with the digital test. Because not only would that essentially continue to enable this problem, it would actually exacerbate it. It would make it worse. Because then people don't even have a real number. They just say, oh, I got 68 out of 75 right. Which, again, even more mysterious, even more uncertain. So for those of you holding out hope that the continued flex would produce an immediate at the test, right after the test result, I think this policy alone tells us that's not the case.
For now.
For now.
One of the things that we've seen is, and again, it takes an outside observer to know this, there has been massive change in how LSAC has acted, been transparent, disclosed information in the last several years. They are so much better now. It's just night and day to say 5 years ago. And so I think sometimes there are these old policies that are really diehards where it's like, no, we can't do that because of this. But as things start to change, it makes it easier for more things to change. So I think it is possible that at some point we do reach that because we know that the GRE and the GMAT do this, and we don't see grad schools and business schools losing their minds over so-called unofficial scores being reported. So sometimes I think things are a holdover, and it looks like they're just permanently set. But I don't know that that's the case. I think this could change at some point. So yes, for now, it's not going to happen, but maybe later it will.
Here's hoping.
What's up next on the LSAT World agenda?
Well, this is probably the one that's the most salient to what we're going to talk about for the rest of this, which is the November LSAT deadline is fast approaching. It is this Wednesday, I believe. So that'll be Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, right before midnight. September 23rd is the last chance you'll have to sign up for the November 2020 test.
Yeah, and if in your mind you're thinking, isn't it September 30th? No, that was the old deadline, and then when they changed the test date, they moved this backwards or forwards, however you want to look at it. They moved it earlier, so it is no longer September 30th, it is September 23rd, and typically the deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Although, if possible, try to do it during the day so that if you have an issue, you can call them while the phone lines are still open.
Yeah, they always say do it during business hours, so... And that's
Exactly.
that's a fair date on the one hand. I don't love that they moved it back a week, or forward a week again, as you say. But there's at least this gap for most people between them getting their August score and having a chance to sign up for what will be the next available test. So August scores should all be out by then if, to reiterate, you've submitted an approved writing sample. If not, do it tonight. Do it as soon as you hear this. And hopefully they can get you turned around quickly.
Yeah, will they get you turned around in time for the 23rd? I'd say no. I'm not even sure they'll even have your file results, but you still need to do it, so the advice still stands, go do it now. And then, of course, coming up after that deadline, we've got the October LSAT. So it just turns, man, the wheel just turns so fast.
Yep. We're just riding the storm out, Dave. Keeping on.
Riding.
That's right. The October LSAT starts on Saturday, October 3rd. So a little less than 2 weeks from when this episode launches.
And that was another, and really the final update from the LSAT World was that in the midst of all that LSAT writing, they released the information that the sign-up times for this October LSAT, when you can choose your day and your time, they will open on Tuesday, September 22nd, and that will be at noon Eastern Time. They typically send an email around that says, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to create, and then you have the opportunity to go in and sign up. And I will remind everybody that even though there's a mad rush at the very beginning, there are many, many times available and many, many slots in each time that are available. So it's not just like, okay, there was only one 11:20 slot. No, there's usually, as I understand it, dozens and dozens. So
Yeah. I mean, don't sit on it for days and days, especially if you know exactly what you want to do. But you don't have to be there on your computer at noon on Tuesday.
Otherwise, you're going to end up hitting F5 again as you try to
their
refresh.
site's going to crash.
Because we've seen that happen in each of the other signups. So you have that.
There we go. So get signed up for October if you're already registered for it. Pick your date and good luck on that test. But let's talk a little further down the road. Let's talk November.
The November LSAT.
Indeed.
So it's interesting because at this particular point, you've had the August scores come out. A lot of people are taking October, but not everybody. Some of the people who are taking October would have the option to take November as well. And so we know that there are a lot of people who are kind of debating to themselves whether or not they should take the November LSAT. So if you're considering it, but you're uncertain, we're going to talk about that. We're here to help you make the right decision and give you some of the pros and cons of how this discussion will actually play out.
Yeah. And this is both to take it and really at this point to just register for it or to plan to take it. October scores will be out before the November test. You may find if you take October, you don't need to take November. You may sign up for November and then get the August score 2 days later and realize you can withdraw. But for the option to take the test, that's really what we're talking about. Is it worth signing up for?
And the other thing I'll add on here, just as a precursor to this, but which really won't feature throughout it, we realize that signing up every single time for these tests is expensive. Mm-hmm. And so that is ultimately a con in the grand scheme of things. And I know a lot of people think, John, that you and I are like, take the LSAT, just take it every single time.
Do it again.
Yeah, that's what they think. That is not at all how I approach it. I've had several people this week ask me questions where my response was, I'd say you're good. There's no need for you to go spend the time and the money to do that. And obviously, the amount of time you have to spend doing something and what you have to pay for it, these are real world considerations. So that kind of flavors everything that we're talking about. But I put that out there now because I don't want someone to assume, oh, they're just going to say take the test.
For sure. You and I both just told the same student on Saturday that she should not sign up for it, that she's good, she's done, she should go ahead and take her score and apply.
That's right.
So we have a history. We have a history of saying no as well.
Well, she hit the median at Harvard, and the GPA was top level, and everything else looked pretty good. I'm like, you're really just spending time to chase something that you're not certain is going to happen. I always tell people this: if you're going to take the LSAT again, have a reason for doing it. Have a very good idea that the score that you have on record is not a good indicator of your potential. Know that you can do better. Don't just guess. Don't hope. Make sure that if you're going to go take this test again, you are feeling like, oh, I'm going to nail this, and that whatever is on the record up until this point is not indicative.
Yeah. And have a plan to make that happen. I like the whole, dream board, but you really do need to have like a prep game plan so that if you do take it again, it's not just, I think I can do better, or I'm sure I can. It's, here's how I'm going to get there. And that's really what we do, bottom line. So,
indeed, it is. Yeah. That's really kind of like
our bread and butter
behind the company.
Yeah.
So, what's our plan for talking about this? How are we going to break it down?
Well, I think the way to do it, since neither the test nor sort of the timing of the test, the admissions aspect of it, is all positive or all negatives, we've really got to look at this in almost like what would you call it? Like XY axis sort of pro-con test timing grid format, the 4 sections of it. The test has pros and cons. The admission cycle has pros and cons. So let's talk about both.
All right. I'm a positive person. Let's start with the pros.
I agree. Start with the test itself, the November 2020 LSAT Flex. And the first thing I'd say about it is what I just said. We know it's a flex test, which means at this point, or by then, there will have been 5 of them. People will know this format extremely well. They should already, but certainly by November they'll have a chance to. There's a lot then that you can have done to basically get yourself ready for this known entity, this known flex experience. There's something to be said for that. There's no mystery to what you're going to face in November in terms of format.
There's more than something. That's quite a bit to be said
Fair
for it.
enough.
January, February, we don't know yet. They haven't made any announcements. I think that we may find out somewhat soon, at least about January and perhaps about both those tests. But right now, they are floating around in the ether, and there is no way for us to know.
Yeah.
We do know that November is the flex format, and we already know the strengths and weaknesses of that format, something you and I have talked about quite a bit. And it's also a situation where at this point, there's been enough flex tests where we've been able to create a lot of content and information about them, whether it's understanding the scoring scale and some of the seminars that we've done there, or how in our analytics package we've got 30, soon to be 40 flex tests that people can go take and work through to get comfortable. There's enough information that says we know what to do with this, how to attack it. We know the types of tests that we've actually been seeing so that you can feel comfortable about that format. It should be really what works best for you in that sense. So this is a real positive to me.
Yeah, in an interesting way, this would have been a con of sorts back in, say, May, when the first flex reared its head. Nobody knew much about it. We weren't quite sure how it was going to go, scaling, the scoring, the experience itself. But now it's fairly old hat, and that's good news.
Yeah, it really is. And at this point, we'll be at 5 flex tests at that point. So lots of examples and experience with it to know what to expect for good and bad, but at least that certainty of expectation and understanding, I think, is hugely beneficial.
I think we can talk a little bit too, at least of the 4 that we've seen, content-wise. I haven't seen anything on these tests that, sort of rocked the boat too much or caught me as an outlier or unfamiliar element or moment. In fact, everyone so far, I think we've been able to more or less pinpoint the past exam it came from. There is
That is
nothing
correct.
new under the LSAT sun.
No, and they've all been very middle of the road. I'm
Yeah.
not saying they're easy.
No.
Sometimes when people hear me say that, they think, is he saying that test was easy? I'm like, no, they are all hard. My view of the LSAT is this. Every LSAT is a difficult test. So we'll put it out there. I'm talking about in that narrow range of difficulty. Some of them are slightly easier than others. Now, that might be a 93 on the easy, hard scale, or it might be a 95 or a 97. But none of them are like, oh, that's a 27 on the difficulty level.
Yeah, I'd put it this way. None of the difficulty we've seen so far has arisen out of strangeness or unpredictability. Oddities have not caused the difficulty. The LSAT has caused the difficulty.
Truly, it does. So you can see how, from a student experience standpoint, you know exactly what you're doing. You know the test well at this format. Obviously, we do as well. We're able to talk about it with a fairly high degree of authority. This test came from this particular era. That other test came from a more recent era and so forth. We kind of know the directions that they're taking with some of these things right now. It allows us to do like deconstructions after these tests that are really highly informed.
Yeah.
Especially because it's building on information that we already have from the past. And by the time you get to November, we'll also have had October to learn from as well,
That's
which
exactly
will
right.
add even more to the repository of knowledge out there.
Yeah, and to the predictability, hopefully, of what November is likely to contain.
Now, it also could be the last of its era.
I mean, I almost hope that that's the case. Think of what that, bodes. If November is truly the last flex test, it means we can all go outside again. It means that 2020 is almost over and potentially won't spill over into the next year. But
what's that like to go out?
Yeah, what is outside?
I don't think that's going to be the case.
I don't either.
But let's just keep in mind that for some students, the format of the flex is highly beneficial. I'm not saying everybody, so you have to know who you are as a test taker, but it has 2 fewer sections than the regular LSATs that you have been taking in the past in person. It also has less logical reasoning. And so we know stamina is a huge issue for many students. It's a grueling test. It wears you out. And so having only 3 sections, one of the things I don't hear about is I was so fatigued at the end that I just couldn't focus. Yes, I've had students who are like, after dealing with them for 2 hours on the phone, I was kind of tired to then start the test. But in a normal situation, it's really nice to be able to say, all right, I'm over and done with this in 2 hours.
Exactly, yeah. I'll tell you my favorite aspect of it is you can do it from home at the day and time of your choice. If I want to take the flex at 4 p.m. in my pajamas on a Tuesday, sign me up.
If only I could take it at about 10:30 or 11 at night.
Oh, tell me about it.
That would be optimal for me.
Yeah.
But
I don't know what that means for our circadian rhythm. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, perhaps, we're on normal hours.
yeah, I'd have to fly over there and take it, but
Yeah.
then we know that that's not really something you can do. So overall, a lot of positives about that test. We know a lot, and we can be certain about what it is they're going to be doing and what the format is, and you can figure from there whether or not it's a good format for you.
Yeah.
So I'd say there's plenty to like about the test itself. How about the timing of it?
Yeah, and to me, I think this is where November really shines. The flex is probably with us for a while, but November is unique in this regard. First, you still have time to sign up for it. You cannot sign up for October anymore, but if you're listening to this before the 23rd, before the Wednesday night of the week this is released, you've got time. And then you've got about 6+ weeks or so to get ready for it. And that is really a lot of time, especially if you're not just getting started. 6 weeks, you can make tremendous gains, tremendous strides forward. So from a timing standpoint alone, to have that kind of runway to the test where you can still actually get your foot in the door, get in, I think that's great.
Yeah, when you think about the brain as a powerful muscle, 6 weeks of like heavy brain work, you can grow so much. You can't, from a physical standpoint, it's hard to make dramatic gains in 6 weeks. You can make some for sure, but from a mental standpoint, you can really change your perspective dramatically. So it's sometimes people are like, oh, 6 weeks isn't a whole lot of time. Yes, it is. Actually is. You can do a lot if you apply yourself. And I realize in these crazy times it's hard because you're like, no, I don't want to. But you can. And if you are capable of doing that and pushing yourself through, there is still the opportunity to kind of like change the position that you're in if you're not happy, or to really cement the position that you want to be in.
Yeah, you made the comment before that if you're going to take this test again, make sure you've got a good reason for it. Make sure you've got, as I said, a game plan. 6 weeks is a long time to implement a solid game plan and to make the kind of improvements that make a retake really well worth your while, well worth it.
Yeah. Now, there's another kind of positive to the way this is timed out. This is the last test of the year. So the way I kind of look at applications is you reach the holiday stage, you're still within the first 50% of all applicants. And that's just the entire applicant pool. You're probably closer to the first 40% or so. It really depends upon the year. But that means that the November test is still early enough to produce results for you that puts you at the front or earlier portions of the application pool. And we know, something that I talked about in the seminar, the webinar that we did on law school admissions last week, we know that law schools use a rolling admissions process. So if you can get in earlier, it's generally a positive. And also, for some schools, particularly a few of the schools at the very top, like Stanford, November's it. They won't take another LSAT after November. They just kind of like turn their noses up to the rest of us who are having timing problems in our lives and having delays and say, sorry, we're Stanford. You'll be taking November or you won't be coming here.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of that. In fact, I think it's presumptuous, maybe. I'm trying to...
I know what you're trying to say.
I'm trying not to go
diplomatic.
too
Have another drink.
hyper-negative on this. I mean, ridiculous is really what I think it is. And I realize it works for them. And if you're at the top of the heap, you can basically tell people what to do, and they are forced to do it. But I still think that that's a holdover from a bygone era.
Me too. I was explaining to a student the end of last week where she was debating November. And I told her, I was like, look, what are you worried about? She's like, I think it's too late. And I said, you're going to have your scores before Thanksgiving. Too late. Like, you're well ahead of the curve with this. As you say, 50% before the holiday season. I mean, the holiday season, if you're talking November into December, you're before all of that.
Mm-hmm. I think this is an interesting misconception about the idea of applying early versus late and what it is. And the only way I can figure this keeps happening, because every year there's a new group of students who come in, and many of them seem to have this idea that, oh boy, if I'm applying in December, I'm just at the end of the pool. I'm like, go look at the numbers. The reality is far, far different than that. And I can only assume that it must be coming out from like pre-law advisors who are pushing this agenda of like, you've got to apply by October. And I'm like, yes, if you can optimize your application, go right ahead and apply in October. That would be optimal. But I have probably said, I don't know, 40 times this week, don't forget that the golden rule is that it is better to apply later with a higher LSAT score than to apply earlier with a lower one.
Yeah. Assuming you're ahead of deadlines, and November is ahead of every deadline. So there you go. Yeah, if February you're going to get 2 extra points over October, there's some debate there. But not with November.
I had someone ask a question earlier today, and I might get the details wrong, but I think they have a 167 on record from this test, I believe. Obviously not signed up for October, feel very strongly they could take November and get 170 plus, shooting for the top schools. And should they do it? And I was like, you most definitely should do it. It's not even a debate. This has been asked and answered and decided upon by experts for years. Especially if you were to go out there and nail something like a 173, 6 points in a couple of months. Again, you look at Harvard, they don't have to report when you apply. Nobody cares. They don't use it for U.S. News rankings and say Harvard had more early applicants than Yale, points to Harvard. Yeah. But I'll tell you what they do look at. What's Harvard's LSAT medians? Oh, what's Yale's LSAT medians? And then they definitely make judgments based on that. So when we look at this, Harvard wants you to apply early with your highest LSAT score because that makes their life as easy as possible and allows them to go on vacation earlier in the spring. However, that is not a real kind of consideration for them because they know that there's going to be people applying later. Get the highest LSAT score. We've talked about this repeatedly. It's the number one indicator in the process.
I'm chuckling to myself a little bit about that person's question. I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you. Was your reply more than one word?
Yes, it was.
It was, okay.
I'm always verbose.
I know.
So
I know, but in this case, you really didn't
I went right
need
into
to be.
it. I was like, because you don't want to just be like a jerk about it, like, duh, or something. You know, I'm like, no, I want you to understand why this is like not just clear, but this is something that you need to embrace with gusto and be like, oh, wow, this is a fantastic opportunity. 3 points right there, I would take it. I would probably take 1 point in that particular position, especially at the top schools where it is so critically important to hit the medians.
Yeah, it's cutthroat at that level. You really, every point is something to scrabble for, really.
Yeah, Harvard's median is 173. And it's like they have so many great applicants that if you give them a reason not to take you, they'll accept that offer, which means they'll reject you as an applicant. And that's not what we want to have happen. Now, if you're at 172, all right, I understand the argument where it's like, look, this is a lot of time, money, and effort. But if you're at 167 and you feel you could be in the 170s and your practice test history is showing you that you could, get back out there, even if you have to like take a deep breath and, you know, and want to punch the world in the face. Do it.
Yeah. I like that. There's some other things, though, about it being the last test of the year and that it's still early enough to get in. But again, if this is your final planned attempt, you're golden in this application cycle. If it's your first attempt, it at least gives you a number to potentially use to be early, and it gives you something to fall back on if you have to start to move into, say, January and February, which I'll also say for the vast majority of schools are also not too late. They're just later.
And this is the other thing that's happened in the admissions process over the years. It used to be that the deadlines were really a lot earlier than they were. And I think this is why these misconceptions continue to linger at maybe the more collegiate university level. What law schools have been doing, though, is they began to understand that having later deadlines created more total applicants, which is great for them. They started to extend them. And you and I have talked about the list that we typically post in the fall of the top 100 law school deadlines, which always makes me laugh because they change them after we've published them. There's always some change. Somebody will be like, hey, I was looking at this school and it's later. And I'll be like, yep, that's what they told us the first time. Now they've changed the story.
Yeah, they never change earlier into the year. It's never like, oh, they said it was March, but it's actually January. No,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like March and now it's June.
something I've never seen is, the later going
Right,
earlier.
right.
But there were schools last year that were in the top 25 who told us, we'll take any score through July or August and consider it. Now, that's not every school, but we found a lot of deadlines were February, March, April, May. And so talk to the schools you're looking at, because it may be that November starts you off, but if you can go get the score that you need in January or February, fantastic. It's all about getting the best opportunity to show yourself, which means the best GPA, the best LSAT score, the best essay, the best letters of recommendation, and so on.
Yeah, I had a tutoring student last year, I think, who had family connected to the University of Texas in the admissions office. And I asked her, and she asked them, I said, when's the last day they really do stop looking at like applications? And she reported back to me that he said, when classes start. So,
And,
and that's
you
UT. I
know,
mean, that's a great school. This wasn't some, 50, 60, 70 ranked school. These were competitive, prestigious places, and they're still looking for the best people they can get up until really their deadlines, not yours. So,
Jon, if you and I were running a law school,
oh
this
boy,
would be our policy. Get the best people you possibly can.
for
I don't
sure.
care whether you apply in January or June. Sure, it'd be easier for me as an administrator to say you applied in January so I could process everything earlier and know more about my numbers. But if a stellar candidate shows up late, you bet I'm looking. And
Yeah,
I realize that, again, if you're at Harvard or Yale or what have you, you don't have to do that. But
yeah.
I
Specific to
would.
this test, would you rather have a 170 October or a 172 November? That's easy.
Yeah,
Easy. Come on, November. Give me that 172.
higher's better.
Higher's better.
So I think that covers a fair number of pros for both the test and the timing scenario. Let's cover the
Yeah,
cons.
yeah, your disclaimer at the beginning I liked because it's true. It's not all golden here. It's not all sunny. There are some things about both the test and the timing that aren't, let's call them ideal. One, back to the format, the flex isn't for everyone. We know November is going to be a flex. That doesn't necessarily suit everyone's particular preferences.
Yeah, there's a student that you and I have both worked with, and in her case, she's very good at logical reasoning.
Hmm.
And the flex test format, it does not make her happy because they've removed one of the logical reasoning sections, and that's part of her strength. So when that happens, it puts her at a disadvantage.
Yeah,
And after a while, you have to be able to say to yourself, what do I think is going to work best here? And kind of like concomitantly with that, she's not great at reading comp. She's actually very good, but she doesn't feel like she's that good, and it's her weakness. So now the reading comprehension has been enlarged in terms of its importance. So they took away something she was great at, increased the importance of something she wasn't great at. The flex really isn't her favorite test format,
yeah.
even though she can score quite well.
It magnifies the impact of logic games as well, which for, I'd say, a lot of people out there is definitely a worry.
Yeah, so you have to take a look at the situation here. If you're like, look, I'm anti-flex, when you know November is a flex test, don't walk into a meat grinder when you're at that point, putting yourself up on the slab. That's not what you want. We don't know for sure what's going to happen in the springtime. At some point, presumptively, this all ends and we go back to the in-person testing of the past. But at least for now, we know the flex is here for November. So if you're anti-flex format and it's just bad for your testing experience, this is a big con to me.
Yeah, I'll put it this way, though. It may be an inevitable con. If you're trying to go to law school in 2021, there are no signs right now that you're going to be able to take anything but a flex test to get there.
It's looking that way. I'm going to add another negative here
Okay.
for the flex format, and that's the score variability.
Mm.
So, to me at least, and I have not spent a whole lot of time looking at the numbers, but there is some support for a score bubble that was produced by the results. For some people, flex works out fantastically well, better than they dreamed of in some instances. However, I also think that variability goes downward as well.
Mm-hmm.
That for some people, it's a dream, and for others, it's a nightmare. And so that to me is also a con about this. I see a wider variation of scores coming out of this. And that's more anecdotal than absolutely provable by me, but that's just because I haven't sat down. I haven't
Fair
had
enough.
time
While we're doing
to look at the
anecdotes,
stats.
let's do speculation. Do you think that might have something to do more outside of the format of the test and more just the procedural aspect of it? Sitting in
Sure.
your own house, having to look at your own computer, having a distant remote proctor as opposed to somebody at the front of the room where you can kind of see a physical person. Do you think all of that plays in positively, certainly, but also negatively? Maybe in ways that people don't even know, subconsciously in ways that people don't know.
Definitely. I think it's an excellent point by you, because for some people it's like, no, I don't have to worry about other people and their noise. Nobody's really looking at me. Yeah, there's a proctor there, but
Right.
you can't really see them. And it's calming.
Right.
Maybe they live in an area where there's not as much noise and they have a good internet connection and they have a good test day with no proctor interruptions. For them, that's probably the best possible situation, and that contributes to things going well. I had a student who was talking to me after the test, and she had said, everything went perfectly. I feel like I got a 175 on this. And just from the description of the scenario and how everything worked, I was like, that actually doesn't sound unreasonable. And I think she got a 174. It was like things went well. She obviously knew what she was doing too. So, congrats to her.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that feeling of this was perfect for me was there. There's also many people who come out who are like, well, there was a disruption in the middle. My test got stopped for 10 minutes while they reconnected. They couldn't see me on webcam, or the proctor took over my computer and closed out my session. Things like that happen. Or my roommates barged in the middle,
I hope my dog doesn't
yelling
bark.
about something.
Right.
Yeah. Well, guess what that's going to do? That's going to increase downward variability. So, yeah, I think you make a great point. Sometimes just the way the test itself goes has a huge impact on how people do.
Yeah. I said before that one of the things that I love about the Flex is I could take it from home. But now, kind of ruminating on that and with this discussion, I'm also surrounded by distractions. If you could see the room I'm in right now, there's nothing but TVs and guitars and books and anything but LSAT that could potentially take my attention away. And I don't think I'd pick a guitar up mid-flex, but there's a lot to occupy my mind outside of the test here. I'd want to isolate myself someplace perhaps a little less fun zone.
That'd be great, though. Proctor's like, is this dude playing guitar?
Yeah. Is he testing in a Dave and Buster's? What's going on here?
Is that Stairway to Heaven?
Yeah, right. So, I think that a lot of people subconsciously don't realize how good or potentially how bad the Flex can be. The best thing you can do then for this, of course, is practice. Take Flex tests exactly under the situation or the scenario that you anticipate doing it on test day. Set your computer up where you're going to be, take it at the same time. Try to engineer the environment around you to be as representative, as predictive as it could be.
And if all right, I really want to take that test at, 10 or 11 in the morning, take all your practice tests then.
Exactly.
Replicate as much as you possibly can down to the time of day, just so you can get used to that rhthmic approach to it.
I like that. Yeah, and if you're not sure, start to experiment early, midday, afternoon. I had a student who thought 2 p.m. was going to be his sweet spot. But what he realized was that by about 2:30, he was starving, he was running out of gas. It's because he felt great at 2, but started to peak kind of too soon really into the test.
Yeah.
He should have started probably around 1, and then 2 would have been the midpoint as opposed to the beginning point.
So another negative that we have here is that these flex tests, including November at this point, they now count against your retake limits. So you have to start managing those as well. And any LSAT in the future, whether it is flex or in person, is going to count against your limits as well. So you can't just kind of keep taking tests with impunity. You have to manage that and kind of think to yourself, what is my schedule going to look like? What's going to be optimal for me? And for some people, rushing to take a test that you don't feel good about, and that might be November, it might qualify here, that could be a big negative for you.
Yeah, you can't just take these things on a whim anymore. They're no longer free shots at it.
Let's go to the next negative, which to me is
one of
the big ones.
It's a long-standing negative at this point, unfortunately. It's a negative we've sadly gotten used to, which is the fact that November is non-disclosed. You are not going to get a copy of the test. You're not going to see what you answered and what was right and wrong. You won't see the scale. You won't know how many you missed. You'll know your score and a percentile, and that's it. If you've taken a flex test so far, if you've taken any test in 2020, they've all been non-disclosed.
Yeah, and they convert them too, because they say at first it's going to be disclosed,
I know.
and then when they turn it to flex, they're like, okay, changed our minds.
Pull the rug.
Yeah, which is, most people wouldn't understand this about the way LSAC has worked throughout the years, but they've been very good about releasing tests. The fact that we could talk about 90 plus available old exams, go take a look at some of the other testing companies, not nearly as generous in terms of that. So I don't want to have an unfair criticism here that says, I can't believe they're doing this. We are incredibly fortunate to have the catalog of released LSATs that we have. It is a fantastic thing, and it allows us to prepare and talk about the kind of things that they do over and over again, and it's a real benefit. But we now have gone through, or will have gone through, an entire year without a released LSAT, something we talked about before, first time since at least 1981.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time to be releasing tests and then all of a sudden to stop. And that tells you, hey, we had something kind of extraordinary happen with the pandemic.
Right.
I do hope that maybe they release something here as kind of like a midterm, update to satisfy the thirst of us LSAT takers and studiers.
Sure. I had a student ask me last Tuesday or Wednesday. I kind of reached out in a desperation of sorts. Like, I just can't figure this out. When I get my August score back, will you help me review it? And I said, well, I can help you with those three numbers, but
I can
if
look
you want to
at
know,
it.
yeah, if you want a trend or something, I'm sorry. We're all empty-handed. Every
Yeah.
test for the past year, and certainly every test into the foreseeable future, is all going to be non-disclosed. What that means for you as a test taker is if you're using November to tell you something about your actual itemized performance, trends, strengths, weaknesses, it's not going to give you that beyond your own self-assessment. You could say, like, boy, I'm not as good at games as I thought, but you're going to have to feel that way. The test won't confirm it. I mean,
Exactly.
it'll confirm it in the broadest sense, but it won't be able to say, like, oh, grouping. That you won't know.
No, you still don't know what happened.
Right.
Did you miss two questions in reading comp that you didn't anticipate, or was it a logic games mistake that cost you those two questions?
Yeah.
You won't even know if it was two questions for sure, but if you didn't get the score you wanted and you're like, this had to be a case of like several questions, you can't be entirely sure. Maybe there was some tricky logical reasoning that you just glossed over and that nabbed you. So
It's a good way to put it.
puts you in a bad position.
Yeah, it does. Again, this isn't unique to November. It's just an aspect of it that we don't like.
Any other negatives on the old test format and everything?
The last one that occurs to me potentially is that, and again, this is optimistic me, is we don't know when things might go back to the way they were. Could happen in January or February. I don't think we'll know before the November sign-up date. So if you're holding out hope for that, your window of hope is running out. But it could be that January and February go back to a test format that you like. That would be a reason not to take November. Again, I don't see that happening, but it could be the case. I could see someone signing up for November and then they get the news that February is going to be an in-person 5-section test again. And being like, oh,
Yeah.
I wish I would have just waited.
Lost time,
Right.
lost money, really.
Right. Lost money is really what that is. So that's the last one that I can grasp at here, I think.
Again, I'd say that's a pretty good set of cons, though. And you can tell if you're listening to this and you're still uncertain about what to do, did you hear yourself in those kind of scenarios that we played out about test taking limits, about the non-disclosure, about the flex format being good or bad for you, or how you'll feel if things change later on? If any of those resonate with you, you have to stop and think, well, maybe this isn't the test for me. You have to balance so many factors. This is why anybody who says, no, you just should take it, stop right there, Tex. All right, this is not a shotgun solution to everybody's problems. This is one of these kind of sniper situations where some people will, think I've got to take it. Some people are uncertain. Some people will be like, there's no way I'm taking it. So you have to find yourself in this whole discussion that we're having.
Yeah, it's a great point. To which I will add, you're also going to have to then come up with an alternative. And I don't have an alternative to any of those points that we just made. I think January and February are going to be flex. They'll count against your limits. They'll both be non-disclosed. So in that sense, the cons of November are likely to continue through into the early part of 2021 as well, in which case these may just have to be negatives, if they are to you, that you suck it up and deal with.
All right, let's move on to the timing negatives.
Yes. And here I think they get a little thinner, at least when you weigh them against the pros, which we covered at length. It is a little bit later in the year. I mean, application windows tend to open in September for most schools. So you're not applying first in line. And to me, what's interesting about this is that schools will see if you do register for November, they'll see that you're registered. And what that means for people who might want to apply sooner, who might actually have an application already pending, perhaps it's out there for you already, schools will typically sit on that application if they see that you have a test score coming up. If they see there's going to be an update to your credentials, they will wait for the update, typically.
Yeah, most schools will do that. If you really want to make sure about it, you can actually send them a note that says, hey, I've got the score on record, but I am taking the November LSAT. Be so greatly appreciated if you could delay reviewing my application or putting it in complete status. The schools who have that as a policy will be like, yep, we're on it. The schools that don't, at that point, they can make a decision. And my understanding is for the majority of those schools, they'll be like, sure, we'll go ahead and delay it as well. If you ask us, we will. So I always say, if you're uncertain at all and you don't know the school's policy, ask them to wait. But they get a report. They can actually pull a report that comes from LSAC that allows them to see who's applied and then if they have any upcoming events as well. So if you took August and you apply to the school right now, everything's final, and you sign up for November, they're going to see at some point that you've signed up for November, and eventually they'll get your November score. So if you don't want them to make an immediate decision, you're like, I want you to wait, you can always ask them to do that, although some schools have that policy as a default.
Right. What I don't typically, if ever, see is someone who's applied and is good enough to get in. Schools say they have a future test, and they're like, I don't think we're going to say yes to this person yet. Usually, if you make the cut, you've made the cut. November's not going to withdraw your acceptance letter.
No, and I'll point something out. Even if you were to go out and score lower, if you were that person who's already accepted, it's not going to turn you into you're rejected. Yeah. I wanted to date you, but now I don't want to date you any longer. Change your hair color.
Right, I met your mother.
That's not how it works. The bottom line is that the vast majority of schools in the U.S. and even Canada now are using just the highest score. So if you can go out and get a 161 and that's your high score, that's what they look at you as. If you come in later on and get a 165, now they look at you as a 165. If you then came back again for a third time and got a 163, you're still a 165. So it's whatever high water mark you can establish at whatever point in the process.
Yeah.
And as far as retakes, I had somebody ask me, I think it must have been yesterday, I don't want to take the LSAT twice. I think it looks bad. And I thought that was a really interesting point because, sometimes, John, you and I feel like, well, it's all been talked about. It's all asked and answered at this point. And even though that may be the case, not everybody has had the opportunity to, get that information.
Yeah, 5,000 people didn't do the writing. So, yeah.
Pretty good example right there, eh?
I thought so.
We'll probably be joking about those 5,000. If you're one of those 5,000, I am sorry. But we got to have some fun here. But their thinking was, well, I just want one score, and that's it, and that's all the schools want to see. And maybe that was true in 1984, but at this point, it has really opened up where multiple takes is really the norm, not the exception. And as I've said previously, I know students have taken the LSAT 5, 6, 7 plus times and gotten into top schools. So it is not all of a sudden some kind of terrible thing. Do I want to see you take it 7 times? Absolutely not, for many different reasons, your sanity being one of them. However, if that's what it takes, it doesn't rule you out automatically, even at some of the, the really top schools as well. So just keep that in mind. Kind of like a little sidebar point there.
Yeah, I wonder if there's something subconscious about you using 1984 as your sample year for that. That's what stood out to me, but I'll leave that alone.
I'll tell you what I saw online recently. It was like 1984 was not meant to be an instruction manual.
Right.
And I was like, ooh, good one.
Yeah, I well thought that was fiction.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Pity though.
I will say, yeah, I think you're spot on with that. In fact, to me, a lot of times it's almost strange when someone only takes it once. It means that something went so exceptionally well that they don't feel they can improve on it. That is
Yeah,
a
and that's not the
really,
normal.
yeah, that's a really abnormal event, in my opinion.
Most everybody walks out thinking, "Oh, I could have done this differently, I could have done that better." It's hard, no matter whether it's an in-person test that, takes 3+ hours or whether it's the flex test taking, almost 2 hours. It's hard to just be perfect over that long of a period of time.
Yeah,
So yeah,
your version of perfect, whatever's most ideal for you. It's rare that
exactly.
somebody's like, that's better than my potential. I can't believe I lucked into that, because that's almost what it has to feel like to be like, I am done. Or you've hit a number that's so satisfactory for whatever target schools you have that it makes sense to stop. But again, for most people,
Y-
that's not their first go at it.
Yeah, if you want to go to a local school that has a median at say 154 and you went out and you posted a 160, yeah, you're probably good. You're going to get money, you're going to be happy. You probably don't really need to waste the time on it. Or if you went out and you posted a 177, unless you really want to challenge yourself and go for perfect, I don't see the reason to retake scores like those
Right.
in
Perfect.
those contexts.
Yeah. We talked before in the pros section that November's really not too late for schools, even the snootier schools, let's say, like the Harvard, the Yale, the Stanford.
Now they're snooty. I
We're
like
becoming
that.
less diplomatic as we go.
Really, like it's so true, isn't it?
As your attorney, cheers. Um, is it too late for certain specialized versions of the programs to which people might apply? Early acceptance, early decision.
It is for some. There are some early decision programs, and interestingly enough, we talked about this in the Law School Admissions 101 webinar the other night,
Hmm.
that do want the October test. Some of them will take November, so I'm not talking about all of them, but there are some that say if you want to apply early decision, which again gives you a binding result early on in the process, you have to have taken the October test at the latest. So that would be a con here in terms of the timing for the November test, because if you want to go ED, as we regrettably say, then you'd have to have taken October for certain schools.
That's right. So yeah, check and see. And I don't know that it would disqualify anyone from an early decision program if you had a score and had submitted it under the deadline and were also signed up for November. But check with schools. Don't get caught off guard by any of this because you just didn't seek the information out. It is there. And as I always tell people, contact the schools directly. They want to help you. Look, they want you to be the best possible applicant you can be so they can say yes to you, so you can give them money.
Yeah, it would not disqualify you.
I wouldn't think, yeah.
Yeah, first off, because if you get rejected on the early decision, at many schools, you won't go into the regular decision pool. So that could be seen as saying, look, I still think I can do better, and I realize you might not take me. So there is that. And then, of course, there is the point that even though some of these schools say, that's it, October, what they're really saying is we want to be able to take a look at your full application early. As far as I understand it, in those instances with a lot of schools, when they see a November result come in, they're not waiting for it. They're considering you. But if you all of a sudden come in and post like 3-4 points higher, they're aware of it.
Mhm.
It might make them more likely to say, yes, let's lock this person in a binding decision. And now they can't negotiate with us. Add to the class with a high level performer.
That could be a con
So,
as well. If November goes better than you think in your early decision, you may have actually just inadvertently talked yourself out of some scholarship offers.
unless you're applying to one of the places that has a full ride, you shouldn't be applying early decision then.
There you go.
So I get it. And again, I'm not going to rehash this because we did talk about this in the Law School Admissions 101 webinar.
Let me point out, if no one know, or if you're listening to this, you don't know what Dave's talking about, we have now posted this, and we'll link to it. The admissions webinar, the 101 that he did the other week, is fantastic. And if you have any admissions questions, or even don't realize you have admissions questions, it will give you questions to ask and be answered. It was great. I was there typing away. Dave was talking. I recommend you go listen to it, especially at this stage of the year in the cycle.
It wasn't the other week, though. It was just this past week, right?
Well, that was another week than this.
Okay.
Give me a break,
Scared
man.
me.
Time has no meaning.
For a minute, I was like, this wasn't 2 weeks ago. Did I miss a week in here? Because it's possible with all this LSAT writing drama that I did. But I was like, no. I know it was this week.
I think it was about 6 or 7 days ago.
Man, I don't want to be losing my mind, so I'm really happy that...
No, come join me. It's wonderful over here. The water's warm.
Oh, man. Yeah, we did that seminar, and we did post it online. We'll link to it.
Yeah.
So I did that with Jay Donnell, another one of our admissions consultants, and he did a great job, too. I was very, very impressed with what he had to say.
Agreed.
But at the end of the webinar, I talked about some specific scenarios like non-traditional students, early decision versus early action. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of the pros and cons with this test. I feel like we gave it a pretty good coverage here.
It was a fair
Comfortable
shake.
with it?
Yeah, I thought that was fair and balanced.
Excellent. Anything to add?
Only this, that if you are trying to weigh these things out, obviously it's a unique decision for you to make. But for the vast majority of people out there, even people on the fence, the answer is to take the November test. If you're unsure, in other words, if we haven't convinced you not to, then you should. That's my final stance on this.
It's an excellent encapsulation of the point. And so I will not add to it.
Well, thanks, buddy.
I'll allow it to stand.
And thanks again for this drink. It's actually it's one of the better ones I've had in recent weeks. So I appreciate it.
I'm really interested in now trying it with Huckleberry because this blueberry one I think is pretty good. I've probably had half of it during the course of the hour, which is a little slow for me, but I'll pick it up now that we're ending.
There you go.
And I thought it was really good with blueberry. And Huckleberry is not a flavor I'm deeply familiar with, so I think I got to get a bottle of this and try it.
There you go. I'll track down some apricot one of these days. For now, it's got a splash of orange juice in it. So in a way, it's not all that close to what the drink was supposed to be. I don't realize the more I think
That's
about
all
this,
that really
I think
matters.
I've just made like an old fashioned or something.
And I've got vodka. So. All right. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it in the world. If you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment or a rating. If you didn't enjoy it, do neither. And if you have any questions, please send those to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. We do mailbags regularly. I'm sure there'll be one coming up pretty soon. So on behalf of Jon and myself, hope you've had fun and enjoyed yourself. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon.